Gene Simmons has never been a man who disappears quietly. For more than 5 decades, the co-founder and bassist of Kiss has kept himself firmly in the center of every conversation, every controversy, and every headline. And, as 2025 unfolded, that pattern showed absolutely no signs of changing. From a frightening medical scare on a California highway, to a Senate hearing room in Washington, to the grandest stage of American performing arts, Gene Simmons managed to make the entire world pay attention once again. Here is everything that has been happening with one of rock and roll's most enduring, most complicated, and most talked about figures. The year began with Simmons refusing to accept the idea that retirement had any real meaning for him. When Kiss completed its legendary end of the Road World Tour in December 2023, it was supposed to be goodbye forever. The band had spent years saying farewell, building one of the most theatrical send-offs in rock history. But as 2025 arrived, it became clear that Gene Simmons was not built for sitting still. Despite having retired his demon persona following Kiss's end of the road tour, he admitted he was not quite done with the stage. In a candid interview, he confessed that he had expected to be fine stepping away from performing after half a century on the road. He had other ventures to keep him occupied: a restaurant chain, a film company, wines, sodas, and various other business interests. But something kept pulling him back. "There's something that happens on that stage you can't buy in a supermarket," he said. That magic, that honest admission led to the formation of the Gene Simmons Band, a leaner, looser outfit that would take him back out on the road in a completely different way. WIVB News 4. The Gene Simmons Band kicked off their 2025 tour on May 2nd at the Frederick Brown Jr. Amphitheater in Peachtree City, Georgia. The band consisted of Simmons on bass and vocals, alongside Jason Walker, Brian Tichy, and Brent Woods. The first show was cut short due to bad weather, with only 6 songs being played before conditions forced the gig to end. A second show followed the next night in Beaver Dam, Kentucky. It was a far cry from the exploding stages and fire-breathing theatrics of Kiss, but Simmons seemed energized by the rawness of it. Blabbermouth. However, the tour also generated significant controversy before a single note had been played. Simmons had announced what he called the ultimate Gene Simmons experience, offering fans the opportunity to serve as his personal roadie for a day, helping with load-in, attending soundcheck, sharing a backstage meal, and even being introduced on stage during the show. The price for this privilege was $12,495, not including the original ticket cost, with the package also including a bass guitar Simmons had previously used. The experience was limited to 1 fan per venue. When critics questioned the steep price tag, Simmons defended it by explaining that liability insurance and legal exposure added considerable costs to such arrangements. The backlash was sharp, with many fans calling the package tone-deaf, given the economic pressures ordinary people were facing. Yet despite the criticism, the packages reportedly sold out. Simmons also offered a second package called the Gene Simmons Bass Experience, which allowed 1 fan and 3 guests to meet him backstage and take home one of his personally played bass guitars, priced at $12,500 plus the ticket cost. Blabbermouth. The solo tour itself also hit turbulence. Simmons was forced to postpone nearly 20 dates on the tour, pushing them to 2026. Some observers pointed to cooling demand and high ticket prices as contributing factors. It was a humbling development for an artist who had spent decades selling out arenas across the globe. But Simmons, characteristically, refused to frame it as defeat. He emphasized that the new format gave him freedoms that Kiss never could, including the ability to pull fans directly from the audience onto the stage to sing or play alongside him. Blabbermouth. Then came October, and the news that genuinely alarmed fans worldwide. Gene Simmons crashed his SUV into a parked car in Malibu after losing consciousness while driving down the Pacific Coast Highway. His Lincoln Navigator veered into oncoming traffic and crossed several lanes before striking a parked vehicle. The crash was reported just before 1 p.m. in the 25,000 block of Pacific Coast Highway. Simmons, 76, told deputies he had passed out or fainted before the impact. He was hospitalized to be checked out. The incident sent shockwaves through the rock world. fans flooded social media with messages of concern, fearing the worst about the health of one of music's most iconic figures. TMZ NBC Los Angeles. His wife Shannon Tweed revealed that doctors had recently changed his medications and had advised him to increase his water intake, something Simmons had never been particularly devoted to. The health background behind the scare was not entirely surprising to those who had followed Simmons closely over the years. Simmons had previously spoken openly about living with atrial fibrillation, an irregular heartbeat condition that affects the flow of blood between the chambers of the heart. He had first experienced symptoms during a concert years earlier, when he became dizzy, began perspiring heavily, and felt short of breath. A doctor diagnosed him with AFib and had managed the condition since. The Malibu crash appeared to be a frightening reminder that his health demanded serious attention. RPARP. Simmons quickly posted on social media to reassure fans he was doing well. "Thanks, everybody, for the kind wishes. I'm completely fine," he wrote. "I had a slight fender bender. It happens. Especially to those of us who are horrible drivers. And that's me. All is well." A representative confirmed to media outlets that Simmons was already back to work within days of the incident. His trademark refusal to show vulnerability was intact, even when the circumstances seemed to demand otherwise. The crash, however, reignited public conversations about the wisdom of a 76-year-old man with a known heart condition maintaining such a relentless pace of touring and public appearances. NBC News. Just weeks later came a moment that no one had entirely predicted, and which caused a storm of debate across music and political circles alike. President Donald Trump announced that KISS would be among the recipients of the 2025 Kennedy Center Honors, alongside George Strait, Sylvester Stallone, Gloria Gaynor, and Michael Crawford. On the surface, it was a remarkable recognition of the band's 5-decade legacy. But the immediate reaction from many fans and observers was bewilderment, rooted in Simmons' own history of criticizing Trump in the strongest possible terms. After January 6th, Simmons had reportedly compared Trump's political rise to cockroaches emerging from walls. He had used language that left no room for ambiguity about his feelings. Now he was standing in the Oval Office, accepting a medal from the same man. Billboard. Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Peter Criss, and Monique Fraley, daughter of guitarist Ace Frehley, who had passed away in October, accepted the Kennedy Center honor from Trump at the Oval Office. They were honored alongside Michael Crawford, Gloria Gaynor, Sylvester Stallone, and George Strait. The image of Simmons in the Oval Office went viral almost immediately, with fans questioning whether they were looking at an AI-generated photograph. One widely shared post called him virulently anti-Trump, expressing shock at the scene. Prime-timer. Simmons responded to the recognition with measured gratitude. "KISS is the embodiment of the American dream," he said. "We are deeply honored to receive the Kennedy Center honor." He also offered a characteristically deflecting remark about Trump himself, telling the New York Times that whether you're a fan of the president or not, he's never boring, and that no matter what he does, this president's going to be entertaining. It was a kind of diplomatic non-answer that satisfied no one while offending no one, a careful balancing act from a man who had learned the price of unguarded political statements. Billboard Rock Seller Magazine. The ceremony itself carried an unmistakable bittersweet weight. KISS was toasted alongside the other honorees at the Kennedy Center, receiving on-stage tributes that included a performance from Cheap Trick, who closed the evening with a rendition of Rock and Roll All Night. But the absence of Ace Frehley was felt by everyone in the room. The original guitarist, who had completed KISS's founding lineup, had died in October, just months before the band received this pinnacle of recognition. Paul Stanley addressed the loss directly, saying we can mourn him and celebrate what we accomplished. It was a rare moment of open emotion for a band that had spent 50 years hiding its faces behind paint. Rock Seller Magazine. Rock Seller Magazine. The three surviving original members walked the red carpet in tuxedos rather than spandex, without makeup, and were swarmed by the press like the rock legends they remain. The sight of them in that setting, stripped of the costumes, the fire, and the theatrics, was in some ways more powerful than any stage spectacle they had ever mounted. NPR. Meanwhile, Simmons was simultaneously fighting a battle that had nothing to do with fame or image, but with what he saw as a fundamental injustice toward musicians. Simmons testified before a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee, calling it an injustice that has been going on for decades, that performers receive no compensation when their music is played on terrestrial broadcast radio stations. He pointed out that artists from Bing Crosby to Elvis Presley to Frank Sinatra had never been paid for radio airplay of their performances. Simmons championed the American Music Fairness Act, which would establish a performance right requiring radio stations to license songs for airplay. He noted that radio stations generated around $14 billion in revenue in a recent year, while the artists whose music made those stations worth listening to received nothing. Deadline consequence. The testimony was a side of Simmons that his detractors rarely acknowledge: the policy advocate, the man who uses his platform to push for systemic change that would benefit not just himself, but thousands of working musicians who lack his resources and his microphone. Simmons said he believed Trump would sign the legislation if it reached his desk, noting that multiple administrations had expressed support for a performance right over the years. Deadline. On CNN, Simmons also addressed American political divisions, urging people to stop fixating on their neighbors' political beliefs and insisting that who someone chooses to support is nobody's damn business. It was a strange message coming from a man whose own political declarations had generated headlines for years, but it reflected the complicated and often contradictory nature of Gene Simmons in full. Consequence. At 76 years old, Gene Simmons is not slowing down in any direction. He is still touring.